How's it going, guys? Welcome to the Talk4 Podcast. Just before we go into the episode today, I just want to say a massive thank you for joining me today for this incredible episode with this amazing guest. It's just an honor and I'm just humbled, honestly. But all of this has been made possible by the people who have hit that subscribe button and shared it around and just helped out by supporting the show a bit. So I'm going to ask you to please do the same today and just hit that subscribe button on whichever platform you're listening in from today, whether it's Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. Just hit the subscribe button. If you want to go the extra mile and you've heard something in this episode that's just changed your mind a bit or changed your life slightly, go ahead, please, and leave a rating and a review. It makes a massive, massive difference to the show, and I truly appreciate it. But yeah, guys, without further ado, let's get over to the episode, and I can't wait to see you there. Enjoy. How's it going, guys? Welcome to episode 110 of Talk4, the Quickfire podcast, where we ask 4 great questions to unique and interesting people. Behind the mic today is your host, Louis Skupien. That's me. And let me introduce our special guest for today, Ray CZ Colon-Lopez, who's going to be answering our questions today. So, Ray, how's it going today? And welcome to the show.
Everything is going great, Louis. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. And I think I may have mentioned to you just before we got on the show here, we've had this one booked in for a little while now, and I've just been so excited to talk to you and really dig into what it means to be a leader and absolute just top of the line leadership. And so I think good place to start would be just let's introduce you then. So in kind of 30 to 60 seconds, elevator sort of pitch, who are you, what your day job was and is, and just a little intro kind of into the life of you so we can wow our listeners.
Absolutely. So I'm a 33-year military veteran, spent the majority of my career in special operations as a Tier 1 JSOC pararescueman. Ended up ascending through the ranks to the highest enlisted post of the United States of America, called the Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, working directly with the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and at times the President under both administrations, President Biden and President Trump. And now I'm a freelance strategic consultant, an author, and a leadership coach.
Whoa, that's I mean, that's a hell of an intro with a lot of esteemed accolades there. And I mean, wow, I tell you what, so obviously doing my background research and having a look at all the stuff on the internet, you go to your DoD profile and it's like a book's worth of just accolades and accommodations and stuff. It's truly amazing. So what an amazing career. I think we mentioned before the podcast as well that this is, for continuity's sake, we got connected through Mike Sorelli's. So for the people who have come from that episode, then how did you meet Mike? And we've got a few people in our network that we know, haven't we?
Yes, we do. So in the case of Mike, we both served together in Tier 1 operations, and we ended up sharing some battle space. And it just so happens that shortly as I was getting ready to retire, Mike reached out to me because he runs a talent war group, and he also wanted to do one of his podcasts for Men's Journal, the Everyday Warriors. So we ended up syncing up shortly after, and there's a small group of us former special operators that stay pretty much connected for a lot of different reasons. In the case of Mike, it's obviously our love and our devotion to creating other leaders. So Mike and I have been collaborating on a couple of projects now, and it's not going to stop there. We're going to have quite a bit of work to get done here in the next couple of years. But that is the story and the connective tissue between me and Mike.
That's exciting stuff. And yeah, I mean, I said it to you before we got on the show here, but when a Team 3 Navy SEAL says that you got to get this guy on the podcast, then you can't exactly say no. So anyway, look, we like I mentioned, just what a career. I mean, you could spend hours just going through it, even just on the website and stuff. But looking at that career, there's just so much to unpack. But I'd love to spend a bit of time just talking about the beginning of that then. So initially, how did that all kind of start? Like where did that all begin? So what pushed you towards the military? Why did you want to serve? And just kind of walk us through that initial part of the career into the Air Force. And then we'll go into what follows after that, which is also just amazing.
Well, Louis, So I moved to the United States from the small island of Puerto Rico, which is the Commonwealth of the United States, when I was 13 years of age. I didn't speak English, ended up just grinding my way through my high school years in many courses as in English as a second language. Then I started going to college in Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut. And one day I was just so dissatisfied with the way that life was going that I decided to go ahead and turn the car around, go to the recruiter's office and say, hey, get me the hell out of here. I want to go ahead and do something different. Now, my initial enlistment was about nothing more than meeting basic human needs. I wasn't fulfilled with my life. I needed to do something different. And in essence, I just needed some structure and discipline in my life. And that is my reason why I joined military service. After I got in there, I just came in open general. I didn't really have a vector. Like I didn't want to, I didn't come in to be an infantryman, a mechanic, a logistician. Whatever they needed me to do, I was about to do. And they made me a logistician. So I was a person that was in charge of moving people's household goods from one base to the other. And knowing myself is, kind of like in the words of the Delphic Oracle, Temet Noshe, know thyself. I knew that that wasn't my lot in life, not yet. I wasn't yet satisfied. So the opportunity to become a special operator came about and I took it on, and that's where we end up as a special operations pararescueman.
Wow. Okay. So that's how you got going and kind of progressing out of there then. So did you find that purpose in the special operations community then? And how did you kind of get into the government stuff then? Because I mean, it looks like from what we have on the DoD website, there's a very long line of commissions there. So how did that career path kind of look after that initial entry into the military? And yeah, did you find that purpose then and that discipline that you were looking for?
I did once I became a pararescueman. So, but I have to walk the rounds from the target back into the gun, right? So because I wasn't yet satisfied when I came into service, I got into a lot of trouble. Basically, I had too much energy and I almost got kicked out of the service because I got disciplined non-judicial punishment in my early years. So basically just being a wild ass, just like I was in college. And I started reverting back to the reasons why I joined in the first place. And something just wasn't right. So when the opportunity came about to become a pararescueman, I was given an elevator pitch. It's like, hey, look, this is what this particular profession does. You will have to make it through one of the toughest crucibles in the Department of Defense. But at the end, I can guarantee that you will be satisfied with your life as it's supposed to be. Those were the words of one Gary Lurie, the guy that actually recruited me into pararescue. So as I went through the pararescue pipeline, about 90% of the people that began training with me washed out. They didn't make it through. And at the end of it all, there was only 9 of 115 original people that started the pipeline training, graduated after 2 years of basically just going through the grind. And it was at that moment, after I graduated the pararescue training pipeline, that I realized that this is my purpose in life. This is the purpose of my existence. And everything from there on, was basically just bring it. I'm here to take it on.
See. So let's rewind a little bit then. So you got into trouble, and did you think that was kind of a career ender, or did you kind of get the right guidance to steer the path? Because I think some of the people who I've spoken to before, especially about leadership and stuff, they've had their fair share of adversary and they've had their fair share of things that have gone wrong down that career as well. But they also have said that those things tended to also lead to the current growth and they actually developed that person more. So do you think that was kind of like a necessary thing to happen for you to have such a successful career? And yeah, kind of what was the reaction with all of that?
I'm a believer that everything happens for a reason in life. And I'm also a believer that nothing is either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. In this one particular case, when I got in trouble and I got demoted, it was a slap to the face and it was a wake-up call that, number one, you're not entitled to be here. Number two, you have a big hole to dig yourself out of. So shortly after the incident happened, there was one sergeant that eventually came to my help, and she just basically laid it all on the line. Hey, look, this is why you got in trouble. This is what you have to own in your life. And this is the path to get out of the position that you're in right now. And based on humility and a thankful appreciation for what she did for me, I decided to follow that path. And it worked out just well to where I was able not only to overcome those things, but I ended up figuring out quite a bit about myself, about my capabilities and my limitations, which I carried on for the rest of my life.
Mm. I love when quotes and famous quotes come to fruition and they kind of show their value. Would you say that the quote of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and then repeating itself, that whole 2 step forward, 1 step back, would you say that's what happened there in terms of that whole thing was the step back that you needed to take 2 forward in that career?
It did. And I believe that the greatest value of it is, number one, it teaches you your flaws, right? I mean, when something hurts deep inside, especially in the chest cavity, that's when you start really soul searching for the right answers. And because you feel horrible, those are things that if you really care about your reputation, you care about yourself, and you care about the impact that you're about to make in the future, you promise yourself, you swear to yourself that you will never repeat those things. But even most importantly, that you won't let somebody else commit the same mistakes. So you start using all of these lessons learned in life to be able to go ahead and not only help yourself, but to help others.
Mm. So you obviously your thing now, and we'll get into it later, but you're writing books on leadership and you are a fantastic leader. Would you say that that was where your leadership journey started, or have you always been a leader? I'd love to hear kind of your philosophy on who leaders are. Are they all, is everyone a leader kind of coming into this world who just doesn't kind of find that fulfillment, doesn't find that role? Or do you think that, I mean, where did that all begin for you? When did you start to become a leader, do you think?
Well, I don't believe that leaders are born. I think, and I also slightly disagree with leaders are made, because in order to be made something, you have to have the courage to go ahead and tackle opportunities that are given your way without fear of failure, right? So I believe that my journey began in basic military training. And obviously, I was really shy because English was my second language. And in all honesty, half the stuff that was said to me in basic training, I understood. The other half, I didn't understand it. And it just so happens that the opportunity came to where one of the squad leaders got fired from his position. And the military training instructor said, Colon-Lopez, you're going to rise up to the task. This is now your squad. And I didn't let my limitations, my English and all of these other things get in the way of that. I decided to tackle the opportunity. Now, that's right, some things wrong. But eventually I realized that, hey, if you really want to go ahead and control the environment that you're living in, you got to go ahead and take charge of things. And you really have to make sure that you hold yourself accountable and those people around you accountable. But because we were successful in graduating basic training, and because we were successful in achieving the coveted honor flight, I think that was probably the spark that gave me the motivation to continue down the path of leadership. And throughout my career, even in my younger years, I decided to always take charge instead of taking shit. And that was something that I took to heart. I took immense pride on it. And I always surrounded myself with people that will work towards that common goal to be able to make sure that the team was successful. It wasn't about my credibility. It was about the team's credibility.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was your first taste of leadership in the military, and then obviously you went on to have this career in leadership, and obviously, like you mentioned, you're in JSOC and you've done so much stuff. So obviously you were in classified locations. With that being the first instance there, what were some of those other experiences or some of those times going forward from there in the career where you think, yeah, a certain event or something happened that just provided you with like an amazing clarity towards leadership and kind of helped shape the mold for your model for being the kind of leader that you are? So what happened and any kind of very valuable lessons that you picked up through that career then?
One thing that I remember back to my high school days was a quote that my principal provided me during a one-on-one mentoring session. And this is a Catholic high school, Colby Cathedral High School in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And Father Frank Whistle at the time, who retired as Monsignor Whistle, he gave me a quote that said, if you want to fly with the eagles, don't hang around with the turkeys. Basically, you are the company that you keep. So I always took that to heart. And as I went into special operations, that was pretty clear and evident. That was mostly surrounded by eagles. Few turkeys here and there, but there were few and far in between. And then when I got into the joint special operations arena, which encompassed, Army, Marine Corps, and Navy special operations all working together, man, it became pretty clear that, man, that quote really proves true, because in every particular group, you have the who's who in the zoo, and then you have the ones that just go along to get along. Even though this particular segment, the latter, is very, very few of them, they're still existent. But the one thing that I learned to do was to latch myself on to the people that I admire. And it wasn't just for a relationship or for basically, hey, I'm associated with this person. It was because I wanted to pick their brain. I wanted to continue to improve and learn from them so that then I can pay it back to the subordinates that I had. And in special operations, specifically in combat and many other things, there was always that constant pressure, because everybody is the best of the best. You know that they are vetted. You know that they have gone through their own crucibles, and we came together to go ahead and achieve one goal, and that is mission success. So you learn and you feed off each other, right? But in the process of learning, you get to see some things that were done right, some things that were done wrong, and some that were catastrophic in nature. And every single one of those things becomes a lesson for what we are about to carry on in the next mission. But that continuous learning and that humility to know that you're never that good, you always have room for improvement, I think it's one of the biggest lessons that I learned in combat, that even though you're at the best of your game, number one, the enemy gets a vote. Number two, you are putting your trust and confidence and your life in the hands of people that you have to fully trust. So that was something that I ended up getting that ended up translating to my time once I stepped off the battlefield and outside of special operations in order to continue to grow teams.
What's up, guys? Just taking a quick break here just to hear from our sponsor, Shopify, for today's episode. Guys, honestly, starting this podcast and stuff, making my own personal website, and even my business website too, it just seemed like such a faraway dream for me, honestly, and I just had no idea how to even go about it. And I thought I needed to code. I thought I needed all these skills and degrees and stuff to start my business, but that has been completely proven wrong by Shopify. Shopify is the e-commerce platform that runs everything that I'm doing just about, and they are the all-in-one platform for running websites. They have their own app store, dude. They have their own app store for websites, so you can have everything from the countdown timers to the subscriptions to conversion upsells to blog posts, pages, and it's all just managed in this one website or app. Even they've got apps on smartphones. It's just amazing. And as a promotional offer for the Talk4 podcast, we can get you started on Shopify for just, wait for it, for just £1. Just £1 to start your business online and get it growing in absolutely the best platform there is for running an online business nowadays. So guys, head to the link in bio and yeah, we've got a code there and get started. It's going to be awesome. Right. So out of interest then, so like you mentioned, obviously when you're at the top of the tree in terms of community and special operators, who were you kind of looking up to at that stage? And like you mentioned, so who was kind of the role model in that sense? Like, was it other operators? Was it superiors? Was it people in government? Who were you kind of modeling that off of then?
Two of the people that immediately come to mind from my early years, even before I got into the Joint Special Operations arena, were a retired pararescueman, Vietnam era pararescueman. His name is Wayne Fisk, retired Chief Master Sergeant, two-time Silver Star recipient, was a Sante Raider in Vietnam, and also was part of the rescue of the USS Maya West, two very landmark operations in that war. And Wayne was the model gentleman and the model operator. The dude was hard as nails, and even he just turned 79 years of age. And he reminds me of a Clint Eastwood. He's that person that still has that Dirty Harry persona from back in the day that is just a visible example of who you want to be. The other person that I got to learn from is one of our former Chief Master Sergeants of the Air Force, and that was Robert Gaylor, Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force number 5. That was a very effective leader because he was in tune with the way that people reacted to the way that he communicated with them. Great orator, both of them. And those were the first two that I ended up learning quite a bit from. As a matter of fact, every time I was dealing with a dilemma, I reached out to them to be able to go ahead and triangle my assumptions, the facts behind the situation, and the way ahead, how I was going to proceed in any particular of the situations. But then, after I got into the Joint Special Operations arena, I mean, you had people that had extreme combat credibility. I was mentored by the PJs that ended up performing the mission Black Hawk Down in Somalia, Tim Wilkinson and Scotty Fales. Both of those guys ended up growing me into a solid Tier 1 operator. Then when I was a Tier 1 operator, I had the honor to serve with people like Admiral Bill McCraven, who is, as a matter of fact, he's going to be doing the foreword in my book that I have coming up, Carnivore Leadership. Awesome. And people like Stan McChrystal and many others, Joe Votel. So you pin the tail on the donkey, that donkey is going to kick you quite hard because every single one of them is hard as nails. But those were the kind of people that I gravitated towards because, man, we had, number one, something in common. And number two, they were that visible example with a perfect track record, with the type of demeanor and temperament that I wanted to achieve. And they were just a model to emulate.
Yeah. I mean, I hear so often nowadays people saying how vitally important it is to have people that you look up to and model off of, but also how important it is to have mentors. And I feel like so many people are lacking that nowadays. And so how important do you think that is for a young person nowadays, like a young person, maybe not even in the military, just in business or in sport or in any kind of walk or life? How do you find a mentor, and how do you kind of choose who to look up to in a sense? Or is that just something that you're going to find naturally? Or if you're feeling a bit sort of lost and you don't have much direction in terms of who you want to be like or what you want to do in future, how would you kind of start, and how do you find someone who might be able to help with that, do you think?
For any prospective young man or woman that is getting started in their career and they want to be successful, the first step that I will encourage them to take on is to find a person that is successful in the line of work. Now, it may not necessarily be the CEO, it may not necessarily be the lead sales agent, it may be somebody that they actually look at that person and say, wow, if I'm to look 5 years from now in my progress, that is really where I want to be. And then when I get there, I'm going to look for the next person that I'm going to do that. But it takes self-discipline and diligence for one to be able to seek out those mentors. It's not going to happen by accident. Sometimes you'll get a chance meeting with someone, but you have to seek out those people that you want to learn from. And that is something that is everyone's responsibility to do as long as they want to self-improve. And once they get with that person, that human interaction, not necessarily just chatting or exchanging emails, you have to have that human eyeball to eyeball interaction to better understand the person for who they truly are. Because there are certain people out there, if you look at influencers right now, they can really sell you something good in a quick soundbite or a headline. But when you get to know more and more about them, sometimes you get grossly disappointed because their depth is so shallow that you're like, wow, okay, so that was just a flash of greatness that you had, but there's nothing else behind it. So when you start learning from humans one-on-one and you develop that personal relationship with that person who you strive to be like, man, magical things happen because you really, really start understanding a lot more of the path that you need to take.
Yeah, that's some really good advice there. So true. So talking about your own leadership then, so as someone who I'm from the UK, I know that we have 47% of United States listeners there, and we've had a load of veterans on in the past who obviously are able to give a lot of advice, and people who are interested in the subject will know more about the rankings and everything. But I was hoping you could kind of, for anyone who isn't sort of military oriented or doesn't kind of know too much about the whole ranking system and stuff, the SEAC, can you describe a little bit about exactly what that rank entails and how high that rank is, and what some of the tasks and the kind of responsibilities were there for you in that role, and how you also came to get it?
So beginning on the rank structure, Louis, so we start from E1, which is basically in the Air Force, Airman Basic, and you can go to the top 1% of the force, which is E9, Chief Master Sergeant. In between that, there's several gates that you have to go ahead and pass through, from being an airman to becoming a non-commissioned officer to then becoming a senior non-commissioned officer. So for all intents and purposes, the rank of Chief Master Sergeant is the pinnacle for a leadership in the United States Air Force. After that, there's certain roles that you can take on. Specifically in this case, the role of Command Chief Master Sergeant, which is basically an organizational leader at a higher level, specifically working with general officers in the United States Air Force. And then out of those command chiefs, one has the opportunity to compete, if in the right position, for the rank of Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, which is the top dog in the United States Air Force when it comes to enlisted. Well, that is in the Air Force rank structure. The same goes for the Army, the same goes for the Navy, Marine Corps, and now the Space Force. But now, at some point, you're going to get to operate in the joint environment. And out of that joint environment, you have a person at the Pentagon that is called the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The Joint Chiefs is that purple entity, basically that gathering of all of the services to make decisions and help the Secretary of Defense, who is the top leader in the Department of Defense, i.e. in your MOD, the Minister of Defense, in the case of the UK listeners. And that person then chooses a senior enlisted leader, which is the Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Chairman. It is a position and it is also a rank. And it is classified as the highest enlisted rank in the entire Department of Defense, meaning that it is by position higher than the Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps, the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy, the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, and so on. So how did I get to actually compete and be successful in that position? Well, I attribute that quite a bit to my decade in the Joint Special Operations arena. I had joint credibility throughout the years. I got to be known once I left Special Operations and took that command chief route, that I was a no-nonsense leader, that what you saw was what you got, and it wasn't going to be sugar-coated, and we were just going to get to right, regardless of what it took. And eventually, when I interviewed for the position, that credibility and that reputation eventually led for General Mark Alexander Milley to choose me as a senior enlisted advisor to the chairman.
I see. Okay, that makes a lot more sense now. And wow, I mean, that is just truly such an incredible achievement. So well done you. And obviously in that role, it's described as, like you said, the advisor. So without being too cheeky and obviously not revealing anything, but what were you advising then? What were you advising on?
Well, there were a lot of things that were taking place. So if you look at the timeline, so I came in December of 2019. That was right around the time that the Turks came across the Syrian borders. So that conflict started heating up in the Middle East. Then shortly after that, we had COVID come into the picture, which affected every single one of us globally. In the middle of all of that, we had the civil unrest in the United States of America, including the attacks on the Capitol on January 6th. Then, of course, we have the withdrawal from Afghanistan. We had the issues with Iran at the time. And then we had some specific service-specific issues, Department of Defense issues, that we were navigating across to make sure that we maintained the wartime focus we needed for whatever fight was going to come next. So those are just a few examples of the circles that I was involved in, advising the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the tank, which is the Joint Chiefs themselves, the Secretary of Defense, and at times the president in person.
Right. So I just love this subject. I think it's so interesting, and I'd love to kind of see where the boundaries are slightly here. But what was your advice then with COVID? Because obviously that was a very interesting time for everyone, and I think I'd be really interested to hear what it was like for someone from the United States, but also someone in the government as a high rank that you were in. So for me, I mean, I was in France at the time training tennis, and I remember seeing a little poster in the hospital talking about wearing masks and stuff, and something happening in Wuhan in China. And then, the months following that, I went back home because I had some health problems, and we were thinking about whether I should go back to France to continue training, or if we should see if this whole COVID thing was just going to die down quickly. And then it just took over the world. I mean, I remember when we had the very first case here in the UK, it was actually in a city not far from here. And then it just spread everywhere, and then the lockdowns happened. So, from your perspective, when this started to come on to, pieces of paper in front of you, and you were starting to kind of hear about this thing, how did you kind of approach it? And what was your advice to dealing with it?
So it just so happens that when COVID kicked off, I was traveling with the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and we just happened to be in the Seattle, Washington area. Now, if you recall, in the United States, that was where the first case was actually identified. So we continued on with our travel, and as we were concluding that particular trip, that's when the emergency came about, that, hey, this thing is spreading, it's actually killing people. We have to look to see what's going on. So when we got back to the Pentagon, we started this crisis management team. What that meant, just in short, is that every morning we will spend about 90 minutes at least talking about the effects that COVID was having, not only in the Department of Defense, specifically regarding our readiness and our ability to be able to project combat power, but also how we were going to go ahead and latch on with other government agencies to help the American public withstand this particular pandemic. Now, unprecedented in the case to where we haven't seen a pandemic that big. We trained for it, but we haven't seen one actually take place in our lifetime. So when the balloon went up, we started tracking, we started sending equipment, we started providing logistics to a lot of the other government agencies in the United States and abroad to be able to go ahead and help people weather this pandemic. Well, as we were going along, we were learning quite a bit about it. And in our particular role in the Department of Defense, our number one priority was making sure that we maintain the combat readiness of the force to be able to react to any attacks, just like we do on a daily basis. Now, our wake-up call came when the Teddy Roosevelt was in Guam, and basically had to dock that strategic asset, that ship, because the sailors inside it were infected. And that's when we started talking about mitigation mechanisms. So at the time, President Trump directed to the United States government to create Operation Warp Speed, which is basically the vaccine creation, to go ahead and get with our pharmaceutical companies and fast track this vaccine, because we were in the millions, people that had died. So we needed to protect the American public. Now, in the Department of Defense specifically, we didn't have that many deaths. I mean, we had some due to pre-existing conditions. Some of our civilian workforce that were actually in the higher age demographic were taking it pretty hard. But in average, for the average young man or woman in the Department of Defense, we didn't really have that many issues. I mean, we had people that got infected, but they were able to go ahead and weather this storm. But eventually, the vaccine was developed. The leader, specifically General Gus Perna, who was part of Operation Warp Speed, came back to the Pentagon and said, hey, this thing is about as safe as it's going to be. We're going to go ahead and push forward. And then, I was number 5 in line to get the vaccine after it was developed. And then, obviously came the federal mandate for every single government employee. So basically the options were off the table at the time. In the Department of Defense specifically, if you were mandated to get the vaccine, if you didn't, it was disobeying a direct order. But, I took the vaccine. I have faith and confidence that I was going to be, protected just like every other vaccine. And I thought about my time when I actually took the anthrax vaccine in Kuwait in 1996, which number one wasn't FDA approved. Number two, we didn't know anything about it, but we didn't have the internet back in those days. And basically, it was a flight surgeon, a doctor that said, hey, this thing is a protein. It's going to give you a better survival rate if you get exposed to anthrax. Your options are either you take the vaccine or we'll take you off the deployment and send you back home. Like, all right, which arm do you want? I'm not leaving the deployment. So I used the same mentality, and I took the vaccine, and then went on. But obviously, this created a lot of turmoil with the force, because then the narrative came out whether it was safe or not. And in my opinion, I don't think that there's anything that mankind can develop that we can say for certain whether it's safe or not. But I took the approach of looking what was happening with society, the fact that I needed to be worldwide deployable. And number two is that I needed to be available. And I wasn't going to let some administrative thing take me off the line from fighting if the balloon went up, because it was a federal mandate. The gig was up. We follow orders. And if we don't, then we have to find some other place to exist. But even now to this day, Louis, that issue is still very contentious about, you made me get this vaccine that is illegal. And it became a politicized issue. It didn't become a following orders or not type thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a very strange time. And the whole vaccine thing was amazing. But yeah, because at that time, I was very heavily involved in sports, like I said, with tennis. So, getting the vaccine to be able to continue training and, let alone even travel, that was, something absolutely vital to do. I managed to get hold of it quite quickly. But so, with the whole COVID thing, I'm mixed thoughts about it. And there's so much controversy still nowadays around it. But I'm just interested. I'm not sure if you can talk about it much or not, but just in terms of like the origins of COVID, was the conversation ever out there that it wasn't just an accident? Was the conversation ever out there in governments kind of, around that culture that maybe this had been done deliberately, or was there any kind of controversy there, or was the whole official narrative that was delivered, was that what was always kind of believed within, the high ranks of government, would you say?
Well, I mean, the high ranks of government encompasses a lot of different organizations, right? And obviously, there was some curiosity about the origin of where this thing came from. And it was obviously part of the discussion many times. But that quickly fell second in line to dealing with the problem itself, because now the insurgent was inside the wire and people were dying. So the origin didn't really pay as much importance to us fans as dealing with the problem and eradicating the problem itself. And there's still some talk about, whether it was, lab created, whether it was deliberately disseminated as a pandemic. But I cannot speak on that because those are not my circles. That's higher intelligence, and man, we just needed to make sure that we kept the force safe. But what I did share with the force was like, all right, so if an enemy were looking at this one particular situation, and if they take a look at the global state of affairs during this pandemic, will you put it past them for them not to create something and use it in the future? That was one of the rational points that I used about the vaccine, because if it was something that was going to help me get ready for the next round of this thing, if it was in fact man-made, then, man, I didn't want to take any chance with anything actually taking me off the line. So I wanted to make sure that I kept myself safe in order for me to be able to do my part in the projection of combat power. And the last thing that I will say on that one, Louis, is that I equated it to the same thing that we do with body armor, right? So we issue people body armor for safety. It's not going to guarantee you that you're going to basically withstand every attack that comes on you, because if you get the lucky bullet, it can potentially take you out. But it is designed to give you a better fighting chance of survival. And if that is a decision that I have to make as a leader, then by all means, I'm going to make it every time, 10 out of 10 times, because I want to protect you and give you enough chances to make sure that you're, number one, combat effective. Number two, that you know that you're well taken care of. And number three, that, man, give your family a chance to go ahead and get you back alive.
Just running a quick ad break here, guys, for the sponsor of today's episode, Aviate. Aviate are a fantastic watch brand that make aviation inspired watches. I've got a few of them. They sent a few out. They are just amazing, great watches. And I've got a very special 20% off discount for anyone who's listening into the show today. So head over to av-8.com and use code Louis Skupien 20 at checkout. And you're going to get a meaty 20% off any full priced watch. And obviously, man, you're going to have a great watch at the end of it too. They're really, really good. And there's loads to choose from, all with their own bit of backstory and history and inspiration from pieces of history. So yeah, head over to Aviate, guys, use the code. And yeah, back to the episode now. See you in a moment. Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree with more of that. So true. And yeah, before we move on to kind of like the really applicable stuff, the last thing on that subject I want to ask is, the world seems so unpredictable right now, and there's so much stuff happening everywhere. And what 1 minute this has happened, the next minute this has happened. But if we were faced with another COVID, or if we were faced with something else in the future, what do you think are the main things that we need to do better the next time something like this happens, if it did happen, either from, the public to the government, because obviously you saw that initial reaction, you saw and oversaw how that was dealt with. So what do you think needs to be done better by everyone with the next time if it does happen?
Well, global logistics are critical to make sure that, number one, we get the equipment to the people that need it, the supplies, medical supplies specifically, to where they're needed the most, and also the vaccines, any preventive mechanisms that have been developed since. The other thing that society needs to learn from this one particular pandemic is the importance of being healthy, being physically fit in order to go ahead and withstand these kind of things. Comfort, complacency, and laziness can kill you, as it did in many cases with COVID, because people didn't have the immune system to be able to withstand the hardship that actually that particular virus imposed on the human body. So for our youth listening, or for parents listening to this one particular podcast, please teach your children to adapt a healthy lifestyle, because it could eventually save their lives later on, because this world, like you say, Louis, is very unpredictable, and we do not know what's going to come next. And then the last thing that I will say is that we need to be better stewards of our resources and be respectful against one another. We need to be respectful in the sense to where people started hoarding things. It became about self-preservation and not necessarily playing well with your neighbor, with the people in your communities, and so on. So let's go ahead and look at the ugliness. What happened, with the toilet paper as an example, people just hoarding that stuff, and there were some families that didn't even have it. And then when we had the pipeline attack, to where people started hoarding gasoline, because they learned, they basically had they had scar tissue from what happened during COVID, that if you don't hoard this stuff, you may not get it next week at the store. So we need to be better at that. We need to be better humans, and we have to be better to each other.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I remember the toilet paper crisis. My God, that was just so weird. I mean, of all the things that would go out of stock and something like that, everything apart from toilet paper.
I mean, it was ridiculous, right? I mean, so if we for some reason run out of toilet paper, I'm pretty sure that there's plenty of books and magazines in the house. If there's not enough magazines or books or magazines in the house, man, there's socks that you can potentially. And when there's no socks, man, then you just go out and rub dirt on it. But eventually find a way to be a better steward and not take away from someone in need because of your own greediness. So,
yeah, no, I can imagine. I mean, the rough, tough Marines and special operators and stuff. I'm sure, especially snipers, man. I know they're not just familiar to unconventional uses of our toilet paper here and there. But so anyway, looking at kind of the show that we run here with Talk4, I always want people to kind of come away with something that's really applicable, so they can go away, even just kind of after leaving this episode, and think, you know what, I'm going to go forward and I'm going to go and use this. I'm going to go and try and apply this, or just think about it, have it consciously in my head. So as a leader, I think that's applicable to a lot of people in business, in sports, even in family and stuff. So how do you foster a culture of accountability and responsibility within a unit, a command, a family, a team, and especially in something like where there's high stakes and high pressure environments? How do you sort of build a strong team? And if you have a dysfunctional team, what's the medicine for getting that back on track or getting it good?
The first thing that you have to do and basically be is culturally invested in that organization. Now, if you're just simply existing in that organization to earn a paycheck and provide for your family, and you don't really buy what they're selling, it's going to be really hard for you to be that leader that others need. But being culturally invested eventually helps you believe in what you're doing. It creates that loyalty and that dedication towards the mission of the organization. And eventually you start projecting that on others when it comes to the importance of being the best. And one of the silver bullets that I use in my book is amateurs train until they get it right, professionals train until they cannot get it wrong. And that is just the sets and reps required for you to be able to go ahead and be better every day and make sure that you don't leave things to chance. That if you have a contingency, you're going to be the first one to react to it. And you have the high probability of projecting those positive results that you expect. But, part of that is for that leader that is culturally invested in that organization to be the visible example of the expectations that they levy upon their people. You have to act before you say. You have to be able to be that spark of confidence in your people just based on your daily interactions with others, what they see you're doing. Here recently, I spoke about, physical fitness as a perfect example. And it's not that I'm a PT freak, it's just that I realize all the benefits that come along with it. But there were plenty of young people in their mid-20s that were always complaining about, well, why do we have to do so much PT? Why, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't say much of anything. I just got out there and did it. And if they saw the old man doing it, how their day did not actually rise up to the occasion and say, wow, so here's this old man that actually spent decades in combat and he's doing it for a reason. Instead of asking, why should I do it? They should be asking, why do you still put that much effort into that particular thing? And then that opens up the opportunity for a great lesson learned on why it's important to be healthy. Not just for combat, but also to be there for your family and so on. So the last thing that I will say on that one is that as a leader that is culturally invested, you must never turn a blind eye to the problems of the organization. You need to spot correct people that are wrong, even in contentious times. And you have to make sure that you hold accountability on an even playing field when it comes to the expectations that you put forward. There cannot be any preferential treatment, just the standard. And if the standard is met, you're good. If it's not, we're going to correct you. And if you don't correct, find a way to exist someplace else. So that is really my take on culturally effective leaders that actually hold accountable organizations.
How do you approach that? So when you have someone who's not upholding the standard, because I'm doing bits on this right now with some of my work and everything, and I know that there's a lot of people out there in leadership roles who actually aren't very comfortable in their own skin, or they're not very comfortable with approaching someone and saying, hey, this isn't right, and we need you to do this. And they desperately try naturally to avoid confrontation, maybe because they're introverted, or maybe because they just simply don't like the trouble of it. For someone like that, how do you approach dealing with the people who aren't upholding that standard? And, if you could kind of say, hey, look, if there's someone listening right now who this kind of relates to slightly, and they're thinking, hey, that there's this person in my family or my work or my business or my sports team who isn't upholding the standard I think needs to be set, but I just don't know how to approach them and get this fixed. What would you tell them for being, what would you tell them to do or start with, or how do you kind of approach that workflow of getting to A to B with it?
Well, one of the problems is our affinity to the digital means of communication nowadays. So we have taken human interaction out of the equation in many places, and people are no longer comfortable having the face-to-face conversation. Hell, people are not even comfortable sending that email, correcting somebody else because of the fear of confrontation when they do have to come across with the person, or even worse yet, to get a reply email with that confrontation in the front of it. I always tell people that if you send a message via electronic means, you're bound to lose something in translation. And you're not gauging it on the right timing and the right setting to make sure that the person that is the recipient of the feedback is in full understanding mode. that they have the opportunity to ask you real-time questions about the rationale and how you got to the corrective mechanism. And number three, to know the plan of success for the near future. If you leave it to electronic means, it's never going to get fixed. If you don't say anything, it's never going to get fixed. As a matter of fact, it's going to get worse. So I encourage people to get more familiar with that human interaction once again, to make sure that they, number one, get their point across clearly. Number two, that they understand the position of the other person. And number three, that they get past the issue after one meeting face to face, instead of having to go back and forth. Well, that's not what I meant to say. Or, well, you're telling me that. So don't get into that pissing contest. Just go ahead and get the person face to face, lay the facts on the table, provide a way ahead on how we're going to fix things, and move on.
Was that the same in the military? So did you, by preference yourself, were you doing a lot of your interaction and your meetings and your communication all face to face, or did you kind of resort a little bit to the email stuff? Because I know in such large organizations, it must be tough to have the time, especially in busy schedules and stuff. So how did you kind of communicate effectively, and were you able to get what you needed from people in the meetings face to face during the time in the military and leadership?
So to the greatest extent, obviously using the face to face, but when you're limited, as the SEAC, I was in charge of 2.4 million people. So how can you get face-to-face with 2.4 million people? You can't. So what I did is I prioritized, I triaged, the issues that I was going to go ahead and handle head on. Now, clearly there's a lot of trolls out there. There's a lot of people that just like to stir the pot. And most of them don't have the courage to get from behind the keyboard and actually tell you to your face, those kind of things. So I pay very little attention to what they had to say. But when there was something that needed attention, immediate attention, because either the narrative or the accusations were basically pretty damaging, I took it upon myself to either take a chance meeting with them or call them on the phone. Just a phone conversation would happen several times. It's like, hey, I just noticed that you said this, this, and this about this particular situation. Where do you come with those facts or those assumptions? And then in the course of a quick 5 to 10 minute conversation, issue done, and it wasn't confrontational all in the sense of I'm going to create an enemy or I'm going to belittle somebody. It was an opportunity for growth and understanding, which is where most people get it wrong. That if I confront you and we don't have the same point of view, then you're eventually going to become my enemy because we're never going to see eye to eye. No, that's what human interaction is all about. Understanding other viewpoints so that you can better grow as a human on how to understand the environment that you actually operate in. So there's many ways to go ahead and do it, whether it's a phone call. A phone call is probably one of the best ways to do it, because even people, parents talk about nowadays that their children won't talk to them on the phone. They rather send a text, right? Well, that's because they kind of don't like that immediate feedback they're going to get on whether they like you or not. And it's also a delay tactic that if I say something to you via text that you need time to think about, you're not on the spot to provide me an answer right now. So we need to understand the communication dynamics, the cross-generational communication dynamics, and we have to meet somewhere in the middle to make it work.
Damn, that's some good advice right there. On the flip side of that subject, and the flip side of that, so we're kind of on people who don't have the whatever it is right now to go and have that tough conversation or something. But in your words, because I've heard quite a bit about this over social media for a little while now, but in your words, what's the difference between a boss and a leader, and why should you be either one of those? And are there instances where one's better than the other? Yeah, just a bit of your opinion on that.
Well, a boss is appointed, a leader is forged throughout the years via credibility, via actions and consistency, I dare say. But that's the difference between the two. And often you come at odds with those people that eventually didn't have the grit to make it to the position that they're in, but somehow they ended up there. Whether it was because of self-serving practices, basically kissing the boss's ass in order to go ahead and get promoted instead of doing things right. And that's when most people start getting at odds between the boss and the leader, right? And a leader has no position. A leader can be anyone. A leader is just something that helps others get to where they need to be by providing value, not time, to specific situations. You know, providing sage advice, being courageous enough to get in the arena without fear of failure, and eventually just learning from it and readjusting to become a better person. So when you start looking at people out there that are appointed to certain positions, don't assume that you're going to be an immediate leader and that people are just going to follow everything that you say. Because if you don't have that credibility, they're going to make fun of you behind your back. They're going to be talking about, like, yeah, they told me to do that, but this is what I'm going to do. Eventually, if you're a leader, this is something that I learned in 33 years of service. If you're a leader and one of your subordinates fails, they feel disappointed because they let you down, and you don't have to tell them. And that is because they believed in what you were trying to do. And they will be remorseful when those things happen. If you're a boss and they let you down, they don't give two rat's asses what you think or not. So again, everything comes back to the essence of human interaction, how humans feel when they're actually interjecting with one another, whether it's relationships, whether it's a work relationship, personal relationship, and so on. But I believe that people that actually love, are culturally invested into what they do, they create that followership simply because people believe in what you're doing, not because of the position that you're in.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, yeah, I've got nothing to add to that. That's spot on. And I think for the last question, the last thing I wanted to ask really on this podcast, I mean, after you've dropped so many great bits of advice here and everything, but looking back at, in reflection to that whole career that you've been on so far, I mean, it's still going, but looking back on what you've done so far, what are you most proud of achieving as the SEAC and doing everything that you've done? And also, what do you kind of hope that your legacy will be within the US military? And if you had like one golden egg that you've picked up along the way, what would it be?
Well, this is something that I talked to Mike Sorelli about in his Everyday Warrior podcast. And that was that throughout the years, in 33 years of service, I never sold my soul for rank or position. I stayed true to my core, to my humility. I learned, and I always gave it my best in order to go ahead and achieve the best outcome. The best could be anything, whether it was a combat mission, whether it was taking care of people, whether it was actually doing extracurricular activities and so on. I always wanted to make sure that I led with conviction, without compromise, and with loyalty to that oath that we took as service member, all by being an example of disciplinarity and a loyal entity. So if I needed to pass on something to people, that soundbite right there will be it. Make that into a bumper sticker and go ahead and find ways to go ahead and make yourself an entity that acts in that manner. But again, that was just my way of providing a visible example for the change that I wanted to see.
Ray, so as a podcast host and someone who's ran this show and listened to a lot of people come here and speak about their respective topics and expertise, I've become aware that if everyone listening in actually took everything that was said by the guests and all the great advice given, if they actually took all of it and applied it to their lives, the world would be so much of a better place and people would be doing so much better, I think, professionally, spiritually, just in their minds, everything. They would just be so much better off if they could just take the advice of experts. And we've got people probably at this stage of the podcast now who've been sat here for at least 55 minutes now who have listened to us talking and the advice given and so many just brilliant bits of information that you've come out with. If there was one thing only, hopefully a lot more, but if there was just one thing from today that we've spoken about that you'd want everyone to take away from here and actually go and do. So if there was that one bit of advice or one topic or one just anything from here that you could say, if there's anything that this listener is going to come away from this with, it needs to be that. What do you think that would be, and what would you want to get people to do?
Yeah, we talked quite a bit about, combat, leadership, human interaction as someone, if there was something that I would like our listeners to take from this, it's simply just to be a decent human being. Being decent is not in vogue anymore. Being nasty is. Even in American in American politics, it used to be about what you can do for the people instead of personal attacks, and now everything is just a character assassination endeavor when it comes to that's how I'm going to best my opponent and so on. We just need to be decent to one another. We need to go ahead and embrace the fact that not everybody thinks the same, that everybody's got different points of view, and that doesn't make them your enemy. That doesn't make them different or bad. It just meant that they are in a different environment than what you are. So if we could just be decent to one another globally, man, I think that we will be in a much better place. That is going to breed the right leaders. That is going to breed the right people to be able to take care of one another, and eventually, it makes for a better place for all of us to be. So that will be it, man. Just be a decent person to others.
Yeah, I agree. That would make the world a much better place if everyone could take that bit of advice and go and do that. And the very last question of the show is a new show tradition that I'm asking every guest now, and I think I've had some really interesting responses to it. So if you found a young you, let's say 13, 14 year old, Ray Colon-Lopez running around the streets, and you had that opportunity to, travel back in time or just whisper a little bit in that person's ear, what would you tell a young you in terms of going forward and just for life? What would be your sort of message to a younger you?
Be more disciplined in your studies. I was a very lazy student. I was smart, but I was academically lazy. And I will tell myself, pay attention to your studies, start taking notes early on in life, because I started taking notes when I first came into service, and I got about 13 notebooks worth of stuff with just thoughts and so on. But if I would have started early on in my life, man, I would have had far more lessons learned to help other people be better than who I was.
That's good stuff. Well, we're here. So it's the shameless plug part of the episode. And this is where we kind of go into the whole, feel free to take a minute and promote everything that you're working on bit. But yeah, I know that you're coming out with books. So you've got the Carnivore Leadership book and the Irony of Leadership. Oh dear, not sure if I was meant to tell that, but it's out anyway. So hey, look, Ray, promote anything that you want. So where can we find more stuff on you? When are these books coming out? Where can we go and find it? And just how can we get connected to you?
Well, so I am on LinkedIn and Facebook, open profile, so anybody can contact me via those means. And then on the book subject, so the book with Mike, obviously the Irony of Leadership, we're working on that one currently. I'm working on my solo project, which is the Carnivore Leadership book, which basically I mentioned those notebooks that I kept over the years. So a lot of the lessons that I learned in my life, I'm actually putting them in chapters in that one particular book. And it's going to be a very brief, concise thing, kind of like the Daily Stoic, for people to be able to relate to some hard lessons learned in life. And then the last one that we're working on is with Mike Sorrell's. We're actually coming up with some children's books. And a lot of that is just to go ahead and teach our young population some of the attributes that helps you be a decent human being, and not necessarily to fall prey or victim to some of the nasty behaviors that are basically prominent in society nowadays. So again, as the old heads, the graybacks, we're going to go ahead and do our best part to leave society in a better position than where we are right now. And if we can achieve that via books, via podcasts like this and so on, we're going to keep on working until the end of our days. But those are the 3 projects that I'm working on right now. And, consulting business is what I'm doing at the moment. And again, anybody can reach me via those platforms, and we can make things work. And the last thing for specific requests for speaking engagements, people can reach me at cz@carnivoreconceptsllc.com. And that is Charlie Zulu, carnivoreconceptsllc.com.
I love it. Yeah, I'm going to have all the links and all the information for all of that in the description, guys. Whatever platform you're on, it's all got descriptions and captions. So go and take a look there. That's all going to be available there. But hey, look, Ray, very, very, very last question I want to ask you as well. It just popped into my head while you were going through that part there. And You know, as someone who I have a lot of respect for, and your career is amazing, and the leadership that you've been a part of is just phenomenal. And I feel like with my own podcast here, I feel like I've started to build a community, and I've started to build a following of people who are avidly tuned into this show. And I feel a duty now myself as well to provide great conversation and lead in that respect too. So do you have any advice for me with something like this? Like, what would you tell me going forward with a podcast like this? Like, what's most important for me to do in terms of leading a community of people as this show begins to grow? What do I need to do to maintain what we've done so far, which is inspiring people, would you say? So any final thoughts for me on this show?
Well, we all know that misinformation is a hypersonic weapon of mass disruption. And a lot of people are using misinformation to either get their rocks off, to go ahead and shed negative light on an opponent, and so on. I believe that what you can do as a very successful influencer with people is stick to the facts and actually start telling people about the good in life and not necessarily about the drama, because somehow people just crave drama. And if we start talking more about the deeds of decent human beings, of good people that are actually decided to sacrifice quite a bit in order to go ahead and make life better, whether it was for their family or for future generations, I think that we will be in a much better place. But if I needed to give you some advice, I will say, make sure that you continue to go ahead and run due diligence on the people that you bring on the podcast, on the communications, and eventually for people to be able to tune in because they know that there's something in it for them, whether it's a lesson, whether it's a resource for them to be able to go ahead and improve. But at the end of the day, we need more productive members of society, less trolls and less naysayers.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Great stuff. Well, Ray, thank you so much for joining me today for the Talk4 podcast. It has been an absolute pleasure having you on, and I'm truly honored and humbled to have had you on this show. Thank you.
Louis, it's an honor, and thank you so much, man. Let's keep the communication lines open.
Absolutely. Let's do it. And guys, thank you for listening. This has been episode 110. And if you'd like to listen to the past episodes, go and have a look at the channel. And if you'd like to listen in for the future ones, please make sure to hit that subscribe button. You know, go leave a rating and a review wherever you're at. And just spread some love, man, by leaving a like and a comment. Signing off for now. See you next time. Fights on and good night.